My mother revealed she's pregnant again, but I'm exhausted from caring for her children, so I ran away, but she called the people in uniform on me. Here's what happened next. Sup Reddit. My name is Tyler, and I'm 19 years old. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about having a lot of siblings. This is about living in what I can only describe as a full-blown Seven Deadly Sins home edition, complete with greed and wrath that would make you question everything you know about family dynamics. It's a long and messy story, and honestly, if I hadn't lived through every single day of it myself, I'd probably call bullshit on anyone trying to tell me this actually happened to them. But here's exactly how it all went down. Let me start from the very beginning to give you the full picture. Picture this. Parents who were basically kids themselves when they decided to have me. My mom was 20 years old, and my dad was barely 21. Real Einstein-level family planning happening there. Since two young adults working minimum wage jobs obviously couldn't afford their own place, we ended up crashing at my maternal grandparents' house. Those early years living with my grandparents were honestly the best time of my entire childhood. And looking back now, I understand why. My grandfather, let's call him Pops, was this old-school mechanic who became my hero without even trying. This man taught me everything from the basics of changing oil to the complexities of rewiring electrical outlets. Pops was one of those guys who could literally fix anything with just duct tape and pure determination. And his workshop in the garage became my childhood paradise. The space was perfectly organized with real workbenches, properly arranged tools, and projects that actually made sense instead of the chaos that would define the rest of my life. My grandmother, Gran, was basically Martha Stewart, but with actual warmth and genuine care. Everything in her house was homemade. The place was always spotless. And she never once made me feel like I was some kind of burden on the family. Her kitchen constantly smelled like something amazing was happening, and there was always a fresh batch of cookies cooling on the counter when I got home from school. These weren't store-bought cookies thrown on a plate. These were made from scratch, love-baked-in cookies that made the whole house feel like a real home. But here's what really made those years special, and why I treasure those memories so much. My grandparents treated me like I actually mattered as a person. When I had a bad day at school, Gran would make hot chocolate and actually sit down to listen to what had happened, asking follow-up questions and offering real advice. When I got excited about something I'd learned or accomplished, Pops would put down whatever he was working on and give me his complete, undivided attention. They showed up to every single school event, remembered what I was interested in from week to week, and made me feel like being their grandson was something they were genuinely proud of. Meanwhile, my parents treated my grandparents' house like it was some kind of free hotel with room service included. They'd roll in at 3 a.m. from whatever party they'd been attending, sleep until noon the next day, then spend the rest of the time complaining about how stressed they were from all their adult responsibilities. I'd watch my dad sprawl across the couch playing video games for hours, while Pops was patiently trying to teach him practical life skills, like how to change a tire or fix a leaky faucet. "That's what YouTube is for," my dad would say without ever looking up from his controller. "What happens when you can't afford internet?" Pops would ask, genuinely trying to help him understand the value of hands-on knowledge. "I'll figure it out when I get there," was always my dad's response. That perfectly summarized my dad's approach to absolutely everything in life. Figure it out later, let someone else handle the immediate problem, and avoid taking any real responsibility until it became completely unavoidable. My mom wasn't much better than my dad when it came to taking responsibility. She'd dump me on Gran whenever her friends wanted to hang out, never bothering to ask if it was actually convenient or if my grandparents had their own plans. The conversation would always go the same way. "Can you watch him for a few hours? Jessica's having a crisis and needs someone to talk to." Of course, the translation was always crystal clear. She wanted to gossip and drink wine with her friends, so here was her kid to deal with. When you're 6 years old, eating fresh-baked cookies and learning cool stuff from Pops in his workshop, you don't really analyze your parents' character flaws or understand the dynamics at play. I just knew that life with my grandparents felt safe and predictable in a way that following my parents around to their various adventures never did. There was structure, routine, and people who actually cared about my well-being and development. Then came the move that would start what I now think of as my personal Vietnam War. When I hit second grade, my parents suddenly announced that they were ready for independence and adult responsibility. They'd found this run-down rental house across town and were moving us out of my grandparents' place. The big reason for this sudden burst of supposed maturity? My mom was pregnant again. I was actually excited about the whole situation, if you can believe that. I was finally going to have a little brother or sister, and we'd have our own place where we could be a real family. Man, if I could go back in time and slap some sense into my 7-year-old self, I absolutely would. I had no idea what I was walking into. The house was basically a downgrade in every single possible way you could imagine. No more access to Pops' workshop, where I'd been learning to use tools and fix things. No more Grand's incredible home cooking. Just whatever frozen crap my parents could throw in the microwave when they remembered that feeding their kid was supposed to be a priority. The place itself was this cramped, 2-bedroom rental with thin walls that let you hear everything happening in every room, creaky floors that announced every footstep, and a kitchen that could barely fit 2 people at the same time. Despite all these obvious problems, my parents acted like they'd just upgraded to some kind of mansion. "Look, we have our own place," my mom would say with genuine pride, as if renting a deteriorating house was some major life achievement. The yard was mostly dirt with a few patches of dead grass scattered around, and our neighbors were the kind of people who had screaming matches at 4 a.m. that would wake up the entire block. When my brother was born, and I'm going to call him Banshee because that kid had lungs like a fire truck siren from day one, my parents started looking at me like I was their personal assistant rather than their child. The progression was gradual, but absolutely relentless, like watching water slowly rise in a flooding basement. It started with what seemed like reasonable little requests. "Hey buddy, can you grab me a diaper while I finish watching this show?" Or, "Keep your brother quiet, we're trying to have a conversation here." I was 8 years old. 8. But apparently, in my parents' minds, that somehow qualified me for childcare duties and made me capable of handling responsibilities that should have been theirs. Within just a few months, these little helps transformed into concrete expectations that were never openly discussed, but were definitely understood. I was expected to entertain Banshee while my parents watched TV for hours on end. I was expected to help with feeding time, even though I could barely reach the counters properly. I was expected to change diapers when they were busy doing absolutely nothing productive with their time. The worst part wasn't even the responsibilities themselves. It was their attitude when I dared to complain about the situation. If I said I wanted to play outside instead of holding the baby for the 3rd hour in a row, my mom would hit me with, "This is what families do. Don't be selfish." Like wanting to be a kid and do normal kid things was some kind of character flaw that I needed to overcome. My dad's contribution to this mess was somehow even worse than my mom's passive dumping of responsibilities. He'd come home from his part-time job at some warehouse, immediately collapse on the couch like he'd just completed a marathon, and declare himself too exhausted to deal with any baby-related duties. "I worked all day. I need to decompress," he'd say while reaching for the TV remote, even as Banshee was having a complete nuclear meltdown in the background that could probably be heard 3 houses down. The situation escalated to a whole new level of dysfunction when my parents started going out on date nights and leaving me completely alone with Banshee. Picture this: 9-year-old me trying to microwave SpaghettiOs without burning down the house, while simultaneously attempting to get a toddler to go to bed at a reasonable hour, all while my parents were out reconnecting as a couple. They'd leave me with a list of detailed instructions like I was some hired babysitter they'd found through a professional agency, except for the minor detail that I wasn't getting paid a single cent and couldn't exactly quit if things went wrong. "Bedtime is 9 p.m., there's formula in the fridge if he gets hungry, call only if it's an emergency," the note would read. Emergency? I was 9 years old. Literally everything felt like an emergency when you're alone with a screaming baby and have absolutely no idea what you're doing. When a toddler is having a complete breakdown at 8:30 p.m. and won't stop crying no matter what you try, that feels pretty emergency-worthy to a 4th grader. Of course, if anything went wrong during these solo babysitting adventures, somehow it always ended up being my fault for not being responsible enough. If Banshee wouldn't stop crying, I should have tried harder to calm him down and figure out what was wrong. If he spit up all over his clean clothes, I should have been more careful during feeding time and anticipated it happening. If the house was messy when they got back from their romantic evening, I should have somehow managed to clean up while simultaneously watching a toddler who seemed determined to destroy everything within reach. Yeah, it was exactly that bad, and it was only going to get worse. But wait, and I truly mean wait, because this story is just getting started. It got significantly worse when my parents decided to expand their personal army and make even more little minions. Over the next 12 years, my parents decided to populate their own personal daycare center with 5 more kids joining our household chaos. Each new addition brought exponentially more insanity to the situation. and I'm going to introduce you to the complete cast of characters that turned my life into what can only be described as a real-life survival horror game. Banshee, the first edition, still lived up to his perfectly chosen nickname even at 11 years old. This kid could hit decibel levels that probably violated multiple noise ordinances and could be used as a weapon in psychological warfare. He'd discovered early on that screaming got him attention faster than any other form of communication, so that became his default method for expressing literally any emotion or need. Didn't want to wear shoes? Scream at the top of his lungs. Didn't like what was for dinner? Scream louder. Couldn't find his favorite toy? Nuclear-level screaming that would make air raid sirens seem quiet by comparison. The Destroyer, kid number 3, earned his nickname through pure talent and dedication to breaking absolutely everything he touched. My gaming headset that I'd bought with my own hard-earned money from doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, that became his masterpiece of destruction. This kid had hands like a demolition crew and the impulse control of a toddler who'd been fed nothing but pure sugar for a week straight. I once watched him break what was advertised as an indestructible toy truck within exactly 6 minutes of opening the package. 6 minutes. The manufacturer clearly hadn't tested their product against the Destroyer. Spitter, kid number 4, was this little princess who made mealtimes feel like playing Russian roulette with biological warfare. Think of the game Plants vs. Zombies, except she was definitely one of the plants with projectile capabilities. Her absolute favorite activity was spitting on everything and everyone around her, turning every meal into a potential contamination event. You never knew which plate, cup, or piece of food had been subjected to her special treatment. She'd take a bite of her sandwich, deliberately spit it back out onto the bread, and then offer it to someone else like she was being generous and sharing. My parents thought this was just a harmless phase that she'd eventually grow out of. Spoiler alert, she never did. Tornado, kid number 5, could turn a completely clean and organized room into what looked like a disaster zone in under 6 minutes flat. I swear, this kid defied the basic laws of physics with how fast he could create absolute chaos from nothing. You could literally watch him enter a room, start counting down from 10, and by the time you reached 0, everything that had previously been in its proper place was now scattered across the floor, broken, or somehow relocated to the most inconvenient spot possible. Velcro, kid number 6, was the clingy one who couldn't function unless he was physically attached to someone at all times. Guess who that someone usually ended up being? Spoiler alert, it definitely wasn't our parents. This kid would follow me around the house like a lost puppy who'd been abandoned by his pack, crying if I went to the bathroom alone and having complete emotional meltdowns if I tried to go anywhere without him. The level of separation anxiety was honestly concerning, but my parents treated it like it was cute rather than addressing the underlying issues. And then came Hurricane, the baby fresh out of the oven and already living up to the family tradition of making everyone else's life significantly harder just by existing. 6 complete disasters, and each new addition to our household meant exponentially more responsibilities being dumped directly onto my shoulders. My parents' logic was always the same. "You're so good with kids, Tyler." Of course, the translation of that statement was crystal clear. "We're too lazy and irresponsible to actually parent these children ourselves, so that's going to be your job now." Here's a perfect example of the absolute dysfunction that had become our normal daily routine. Picture family dinner time with frozen pizza, because apparently actually cooking a meal was equivalent to rocket science in my parents' minds. The scene would play out exactly the same way every single time, like we were trapped in some kind of hellish Groundhog Day scenario. My parents would heat up however many pizzas they thought we might need, dump them onto plates without any consideration for individual preferences, and call it a complete dinner. If Spitter didn't like the pepperoni on her slice, it didn't get picked off and placed neatly on her plate, and it certainly didn't get offered to someone else who might want extra. No, it went straight onto the floor, where it would sit until someone eventually stepped on it and tracked greasy meat around the house. When I pointed out that this behavior was absolutely disgusting and completely unsanitary, especially with a baby crawling around, my dad would just shrug and say, "Kids will be kids. At least she's eating the rest of it." There were no consequences for this behavior, no teaching moments about proper table manners or respect for food, just complete acceptance that we were apparently living in a barn rather than a house with civilized human beings. And of course, they expected me to clean it up. "Hey Tyler, can you grab that pepperoni before someone steps on it?" Like it was my responsibility to manage the aftermath of their complete failure to teach basic manners. Public outings with this crew were my own personal version of hell on earth. Picture me desperately chasing Tornado through the aisles of Target while he systematically destroyed everything in his path, while Banshee was having a nuclear-level meltdown because we wouldn't buy him some overpriced toy that would be broken within hours. Meanwhile, Destroyer was somehow managing to knock over a carefully constructed display of soup cans that some poor employee had probably spent an hour arranging. Spitter was licking the shopping cart handle like it was a popsicle, and Velcro was clinging to my leg so tightly that it was physically impossible to walk properly. During all of this absolute chaos, my parents would stand there like tourists watching street performers, occasionally yelling, "Stop that!" without actually doing anything concrete to stop any of the behaviors they were supposedly addressing. Other shoppers would stare at us like we were some kind of fascinating wildlife documentary, and I just wanted to disappear into the floor or wear a shirt that said, "Not my kids, not my choice," to avoid the judgmental looks from people who assumed I was somehow responsible for this disaster. "Maybe you should control your kids," one particularly brave lady suggested to my mom during a spectacular meltdown in the cereal aisle, where Banshee was throwing himself on the floor because we wouldn't buy Fruit Loops. My mom's response? "They're just being kids. Some people are so judgmental." Lady, your offspring had just destroyed an entire end cap display and were now using Cheerio boxes as soccer balls. That wasn't being kids. That was being feral animals who happened to walk upright and hadn't been taught any boundaries or consequences. The car rides to and from these public disasters were almost worse than the actual scenes that played out in the stores. Picture 7 people crammed into a minivan that permanently smelled like old milk, dirty diapers, and whatever mysterious substances had been spilled and never properly cleaned up. I'd be sitting there desperately trying to keep everyone from literally killing each other while my parents argued about directions, money, or whose turn it was supposed to be to deal with the next inevitable crisis. "Are we there yet?" became the constant soundtrack of my adolescence, along with the delightful chorus of, "He's touching me," and "I have to pee," and the absolutely wonderful background music of baby crying that never seemed to stop no matter what anyone tried. These car rides felt like they lasted for hours even when we were just going to the grocery store 10 minutes away. As I got older, my parents' expectations evolved from "help out occasionally when we ask" to "you are now our unpaid full-time employee and we own your schedule." Every single weekend, every school break, every moment when I wasn't physically sitting in a classroom was automatically claimed for babysitting duty. They never bothered to ask if I had plans or if I wanted to do something else. They just announced their decisions like royal decrees that couldn't be questioned. "We're going to dinner Saturday night, so you'll watch the kids," they'd say. Not as a request, but as a statement of fact. Had I made plans with friends? Too bad, those were canceled now. Was there a school event I wanted to attend? Not important enough to consider. Did I want to engage in normal teenage activities like hanging out with people my own age? Selfish waste of time, according to my parents. Friday nights became a particular source of frustration and resentment for me. While other kids my age were hanging out with friends, going to movies, or just doing normal teenager things that helped them develop social skills and independence, I was home changing diapers and trying to get 5 kids to bed at reasonable hours. I'd watch my friends post about their weekend plans on social media, knowing that I'd be spending my time managing chaos instead of actually living my life. The breaking point came when I was 16 years old. My friend Jake was having this party. Nothing crazy, just kids from school hanging out, playing video games, and doing normal social activities. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks because I never, ever got to do normal teenager things. My entire social life had been sacrificed on the altar of my parents' irresponsibility. My parents had actually said I could go, which shocked me so much that I spent the entire week excited about finally getting to hang out with people my own age without having to worry about diaper changes or mediating fights between my siblings. Then, exactly 3 hours before the party was supposed to start, they dropped their bomb on me with the casual indifference that had become their trademark. "Change of plans," they announced, like they were discussing the weather. "We decided to catch the late movie tonight. You need to watch everyone." The completely casual way they said it made my blood boil like nothing ever had before. My plans weren't just some minor inconvenience that could be dismissed without any thought or consideration. This was the first social event I'd been able to look forward to in months. "But you said I could go to Jake's party," I protested, trying to keep my voice level even though I felt like screaming. "Plans change," my dad said with a shrug. "Family comes first." That's when I completely lost it. I never get to do anything. I'm 16 years old, not their father. The words came out louder than I'd intended, but I was past the point of caring about volume control. My dad's face went dark with anger, and his voice took on that threatening tone that meant I was about to get the lecture about gratitude and responsibility. We provide you with food and shelter. The least you can do is help out when we need it. Stop being so ungrateful. Ungrateful. Ungrateful for wanting one single night to be a normal teenager instead of an unpaid childcare worker. That's when my cousin Derek came into the picture and changed everything. Derek was my mom's nephew, about 26 years old, and the complete opposite of our family's dysfunction in every possible way. He'd been watching this whole situation unfold over the years during family gatherings, and that particular night, he happened to show up just as my parents were getting ready to leave for their movie date. "Where is he going all dressed up?" Derek asked, noticing me standing there in my good clothes, clearly ready to go somewhere that wasn't our disaster zone of a house. "Oh, he was supposed to go to some party tonight, but we need him here," my mom said casually, like canceling my plans was as normal and insignificant as changing the TV channel. Derek looked back and forth between me and the little demons, who were already starting their evening routine of systematic destruction and chaos. "When's the last time this kid got to hang out with friends?" he asked, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard anyone use when discussing my situation. "He hangs out with his siblings all the time," my mom replied, completely missing the point in the way that had become her specialty. "That's not the same thing," Derek said firmly, and I felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. Derek turned to me with a decisiveness that I'd never experienced from any adult in my family. "Go to your party. I'll watch them." My mom immediately started protesting, but Derek shut it down with the kind of calm authority that I wished I possessed. "He's 16 years old. He should be hanging out with kids his age, not raising yours." Boom. That was the first time in my entire life that anyone in my family had actually acknowledged what was really happening. Derek wasn't falling for the helpful big brother narrative that my parents had been pushing for years. He saw the situation for exactly what it was. Parents making their teenager raise their children. My parents tried to argue and push back, but Derek wasn't budging an inch. "I'm not a teenager, you can guilt trip into submission," he told them with perfect calm. "Either I watch them tonight, or you stay home. Your choice." That night at Jake's party was the first time in literally years that I felt like a normal kid. We played video games, ate pizza that nobody had spit on or contaminated in any way, and I didn't have to worry about anyone's bedtime schedule except my own. I could actually focus on having conversations with people my own age instead of constantly monitoring for the next crisis that would require my intervention. From that point forward, Derek became like the big brother I never knew I needed. He'd check in on me regularly, take me out to get away from the house when things got too intense. And most importantly, he wasn't afraid to call my parents out on their complete bullshit when he witnessed it firsthand during family visits. "You know this isn't normal, right?" he asked me during one of our escape missions to get ice cream and talk somewhere away from the chaos. "It's just how our family works," I said, automatically repeating the line my parents had drilled into me over the years. "No," Derek said firmly. "It's how your parents avoid their responsibilities. There's a difference, kid." Having someone finally validate what I'd been feeling for years was like getting permission to be angry about my situation. For the first time, an adult was telling me that my feelings were justified, and that what was happening to me wasn't normal or acceptable family dynamics. Junior year of high school brought what I can only describe as the ultimate slap in the face. When Hurricane was born, my parents made a decision that still makes my blood pressure spike when I think about it. Instead of putting the crib in their own bedroom like normal human beings would do, they decided to stick it right there in my room. Their justification was exactly what you'd expect. "You're so good with babies, Tyler, and we really need our sleep for work." Let that sink in for a moment. They had made this baby, but I was the one who needed to sacrifice my sleep, my privacy, and my sanity to take care of her because they had jobs. Like I didn't have school to attend, homework to complete, and a future to worry about. Like my education and well-being were somehow less important than their need for uninterrupted sleep. So at 17 years old, 17, I became a single dad to my infant sister. I was responsible for 2 a.m. feedings, diaper changes, dealing with colic episodes that lasted for hours, and walking the floor trying to get her back to sleep while my parents slept peacefully down the hall. All of this while trying to maintain decent grades and not look like an extra from The Walking Dead when I showed up to school each day. The setup in my room was basically a nursery that happened to have my bed squeezed into whatever corner space was left over. The crib was positioned against one wall, The changing table had replaced where my desk used to be, and bottles and baby supplies covered every available surface. My computer got moved to a cramped corner where I could barely use it properly, and forget about having any privacy whatsoever. My bedroom had been transformed into Hurricane's primary living space, with me as the live-in caregiver. My parents' bedroom was literally right down the hall, maybe 15 feet away, but they acted like it was located in another time zone entirely. "We didn't hear her crying," they'd say the next morning with straight faces, while I stumbled around like a zombie trying to get ready for school after maybe 3 hours of broken sleep. The whole neighborhood could hear Hurricane crying when she had one of her episodes, but my parents had somehow developed selective hearing that only activated when it came to their own baby's needs. The sleep deprivation was absolutely brutal and affected every aspect of my life. My grades started tanking dramatically. How could they not when I was operating on 2 to 3 hours of sleep per night? My friends stopped inviting me to hang out because I was always exhausted or completely unavailable due to baby duty. My social life didn't just gradually decline. It was murdered with malice aforethought by my parents' selfish decisions. The academic consequences were devastating to watch unfold. I went from being a solid B+ student who actually cared about learning to barely maintaining a C average just to stay afloat. Teachers started pulling me aside to ask if everything was okay at home. But what was I supposed to tell them? My parents turned me into a single teenage dad and I'm responsible for night feedings? That seemed too crazy and dysfunctional to be believable. When my guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, called home about my dramatically dropping GPA, the conversation was absolutely unbelievable. "We're concerned about Tyler's academic performance," she told my mom. "His grades have dropped significantly this semester. Is everything okay at home?" My mom, without missing a single beat, responded, "Oh, he's just going through a rebellious phase. You know how teenagers can be, not applying himself like he should." Mrs. Rodriguez, clearly confused by this explanation, pressed further. "His teachers say he falls asleep in class frequently. Are you sure there isn't something affecting his sleep schedule?" "He probably stays up too late playing video games," my mom replied dismissively. "Kids these days don't know how to manage their time properly." Video games. Right. Because I had so much free time for recreational activities between changing diapers at 3 a.m. and getting everyone ready for school in the morning. Mrs. Rodriguez suggested that maybe I needed more support or fewer responsibilities at home to help me focus on my studies. My mom actually laughed at this suggestion. "Kids these days have it too easy. A little responsibility never hurt anyone. It builds character." The conversation ended with my mom promising to have a talk with me about time management and study habits, which translated into a lecture about how I needed to try harder in school and stop making excuses for my poor performance. The final academic kick in the teeth came that spring when something incredible happened, and then was immediately destroyed by my parents' selfishness. I'd been accepted to this highly competitive engineering summer program at the local college. It was a 4-week intensive coursework experience that could have seriously boosted my college applications. The program was extremely selective, looked incredible on resumes, and for the first time in months, I was genuinely excited about an opportunity for my future. My parents' response when I told them about the acceptance was exactly what you'd expect by this point. "Who's going to watch the kids while we work? It's only 4 weeks, I protested, and Derek said he'd help out on weekends. "We're not imposing on Derek every time you want to do something selfish," they replied. They flat out refused to let me participate. No discussion, no compromise, no consideration whatsoever for what this opportunity could mean for my college prospects and future career. No acknowledgement that this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance that other kids would kill for. I watched that acceptance letter turn into just another reminder of everything I was missing out on because my parents couldn't be bothered to actually raise their own children. "There will be other opportunities," my dad said dismissively, like prestigious summer programs grew on trees and were available to anyone who wanted them. When I asked when exactly there would be time for these other opportunities, considering that my schedule was completely controlled by their childcare needs, he didn't have an answer for that question. The worst part was watching other kids from my school post about their amazing summer programs on social media. These were kids who weren't any smarter than me, didn't have better grades than I'd had before my life went to hell, but they had one crucial advantage: parents who actually prioritized their children's education over their own convenience. They got to spend their summer learning valuable skills, building impressive resumes, and preparing for their futures, while I spent mine changing diapers and breaking up fights between Spitter and Tornado over who got to use the TV remote. Around this time, my mom's sister decided to weigh in on our family situation. And yes, her name actually was Linda, because she was basically my mom's chief enabler and #1 cheerleader for all the dysfunction. Linda had 2 kids of her own, but they were these perfectly behaved little angels who never caused problems or created chaos. Of course, she also had a husband who actually helped with parenting responsibilities and enough money to hire real babysitters when they needed time away from their children. She'd come over for our weekly Sunday dinners and watch the absolute chaos unfold, like it was some kind of entertaining reality TV show. While Tornado was systematically destroying the living room and Spitter was contaminating the food supply with her special brand of biological warfare, Linda would sit there with this patronizing smile plastered on her face. "You're so lucky to have such a helpful oldest son," she'd tell my mom, while I was literally chasing Velcro around the dining room table, trying to get him to eat something that wasn't pure sugar. My kids would never be this responsible at his age. When Derek started calling out my parents' behavior during family gatherings and pointing out that their treatment of me wasn't normal or acceptable, Linda appointed herself as the official family defender. "Some people need to mind their own business," she said pointedly during one particularly tense dinner, after Derek had questioned why I was the one getting all the kids ready for bed while my parents sat on the couch watching TV. "Not everyone understands real family values," she continued, like exploiting your teenager was some kind of traditional virtue that outsiders just couldn't appreciate. Derek didn't back down from her criticism. "What family values are you talking about? Making a teenager raise your kids? He's learning responsibility," Linda shot back. "It'll make him a better man someday." "It'll make him resent his family," Derek replied bluntly. The tension in that room could have been cut with a knife. My parents just sat there like this was completely normal family discussion, while I wanted to disappear into the floor and avoid being the center of this uncomfortable confrontation. Linda cornered me later in the kitchen while I was cleaning up the dinner disaster zone, blocking my path to the dishwasher like she had something important to say. "You know how good you have it here, right?" she said, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone that adults use when they're about to gaslight you. "Some kids don't have families that care about them the way yours does," she continued. I was 18 years old by this point and completely tired of the constant gaslighting. "Yeah, and some kids also don't have to be parents to their siblings," I replied. Her face went cold immediately. "Gratitude goes a long way in this family. Your parents work hard to provide for all of you. And I work hard to raise their kids," I shot back. "What's your point?" "Your parents could have put you in foster care when things got difficult financially," she said. Like basic parental responsibility was some kind of enormous favor they were doing me. Instead, they kept the family together. That's when I realized that Linda wasn't just enabling my parents' behavior. She genuinely thought this was normal and acceptable. She actually believed that threatening foster care was a reasonable way to justify child exploitation. The family dynamics got even more twisted when Linda started bringing her perfect little angels over for playdates with my siblings. Her kids would sit quietly with coloring books and educational activities, while mine were turning the house into an active war zone, and she'd make these pointed comments about different parenting styles. "Some families are more structured," she'd say while watching Destroyer attempt to flush a toy car down the toilet. "But every family finds what works for them." What worked for my family, apparently, was maintaining a constant state of barely controlled chaos while I served as the unpaid crisis management specialist. Linda's visits became a source of absolute dread for me because she'd always find ways to reinforce my parents' narrative that I was lucky to be so trusted with important responsibilities. She'd praise my reliability in front of my parents, which just encouraged them to pile on even more duties and expectations. "You've raised such a responsible young man," she'd say to my mom, like my parents deserved credit for the person I'd become through necessity rather than their guidance. Yeah, they'd raised me to be responsible for everyone except myself. They'd trained me to sacrifice my own needs, education, and future for their convenience, then had the audacity to take credit for my sense of responsibility as if it was something they'd intentionally cultivated rather than something I developed out of pure survival necessity. Fast forward to last month. I'm 19 years old now, barely surviving my senior year of high school with a 2.9 GPA that should have been so much higher if I'd been allowed to actually focus on my education. That's when my parents decided to drop their atomic bomb during what they called a family meeting. "We have exciting news," my mom announced, with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing lottery winnings or surprise vacations. I knew. I just knew what was coming next, and I felt my stomach drop to the floor. "We're having another baby," she continued, beaming like she just shared the most wonderful news in the world. Number 7. Lucky number 7. The room started spinning like I was trapped in some twisted version of Inception. They weren't even telling me this news as their son, who might have feelings about gaining another sibling. The way my dad immediately phrased his follow-up made their real intentions crystal clear. "We're going to need extra help when the baby comes," he said, looking directly at me. "Good thing you're 19 now, so you can take on even more responsibility without any legal issues." Legal issues. They had actually thought about the legal implications of their child labor operation. They'd considered the possibility that what they were doing might be legally questionable, and had concluded that my age would protect them from any consequences. Banshee, still living up to his nickname at this point, actually started cheering. "Another baby? Can we name it? Can I help pick out clothes?" Destroyer looked genuinely confused by the logistics. "Where are we going to put it? There's already no room anywhere in the house." Spitter, with her usual charming approach to life, asked, "Can I feed it? I promise I won't spit on it this time." Velcro immediately attached himself to my leg like a barnacle and asked the question that cut right to the heart of the matter. "Will you take care of this one too, Tyler?" And Hurricane, as if she somehow understood the conversation that was happening around her, started crying right on cue, adding her voice to the chaos. I looked at my parents and saw two people who had learned absolutely nothing from their first 6 disasters. My mom was glowing with excitement, like this was the best news she'd ever had the privilege of sharing with the world. My dad had this satisfied smirk on his face, like he'd just solved all their future problems by creating another little human that I'd be expected to raise. That's when something inside me just snapped completely. I was done. Completely, utterly, irreversibly done with this entire situation. I excused myself from the family meeting, went to my room that was still half nursery and half teenage bedroom, and called Pops on my cell phone. "Grandpa, they made another mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need help. Can I please come live with you and Gran?" The silence on the other end lasted maybe 4 seconds before Pops absolutely exploded. Not at me, but at the situation. "Those idiots are having another kid? Jesus Christ, what the hell is wrong with them?" I'd never heard Pop swear before in my entire life. That's when I knew he was every bit as fed up with my parents' behavior as I was, and that he'd probably been watching the situation develop with growing anger for years. "Pack your essentials," he said, with the kind of decisive authority that I'd been craving from an adult my entire life. "We're coming to get you right now." While I was frantically packing the most important things I could fit in a duffel bag, my parents were already banging on my bedroom door, demanding that I come out and explain what I was doing. I ignored them completely. I grabbed some clothes, my phone and charger, and most importantly, my birth certificate and social security card. Shout out to those legal advice forums I'd been reading for that crucial tip about taking your important documents. Pops and Gran showed up at our house within 40 minutes, and I was ready to walk out that door forever. I'd never seen my grandparents look so angry in my entire life. Pops looked like he wanted to shake my parents until their teeth rattled loose. The look on my parents' faces when they realized I was actually leaving was pure shock, but not the kind of shock that comes from sadness about losing their son. No, this was panic. The kind of panic that comes from suddenly realizing that their entire household management system was about to collapse. They weren't devastated that their child was moving out. They were already frantically calculating who was going to handle all the responsibilities they dumped on me for years. "You can't just leave!" my mom shouted, like I was somehow breaking a legally binding contract that I'd never agreed to sign. "Watch me," I said, walking past her with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "We're your parents," my dad added, like that biological fact meant something coming from people who had treated me like hired help for the majority of my life. "No," I said, stopping at the front door to look back at them one final time. "You're the people who gave birth to me. There's a significant difference between those two things." Pops stepped up beside me with the kind of protective energy I'd been craving from an adult my entire life. If you'd treated him like family instead of free labor, maybe he wouldn't be leaving right now. My dad puffed up like he was going to start an argument, but Gran shut him down with one single look that could have frozen hell over. "We'll be in touch about collecting his remaining belongings," she said curtly, then guided me out the door and toward their car. As we drove away, I could see my parents standing in the doorway with the complete chaos of their 6 kids erupting behind them like a volcano. For the first time in years, they were getting a real taste of what their daily lives actually looked like without their unpaid babysitter managing everything. Within hours of my great escape, My phone transformed into a notification nightmare. Angry texts, missed calls, and voicemails that ranged from furious to manipulative to downright pathetic started flooding in like a digital tsunami. First came the predictable anger phase. How dare you abandon your family like this? Get your ass home right now. You're being selfish and ungrateful. When the threats and demands didn't magically transport me back to their house, they switched tactics to guilt manipulation. Your siblings are asking where you are. Velcro hasn't stopped crying since you left. Hurricane keeps looking around for you during feeding time. Then came the emotional manipulation phase, where they tried to rewrite history. We've always been there for you when you needed us. Family sticks together through thick and thin. This isn't how we raised you to behave. But the text message that really showed their true colors came from my dad at 3 a.m., when he was probably dealing with Hurricane's nighttime routine for the first time in months. Do you have any idea how much professional babysitters cost? You can't just leave us hanging like this when we're counting on you. There it was, laid out in black and white. Their real concern wasn't losing their son. It was losing their free childcare service. The mask had completely fallen off, and they'd revealed what I'd always suspected. I wasn't their child in their minds. I was their employee. My mom followed up with increasingly desperate messages about how they needed me and couldn't function without my help. Not because they missed me as their child or were worried about my well-being, but because I was apparently essential to their basic household operations and they had no backup plan. When the guilt trips and emotional manipulation didn't work to bring me crawling back, they escalated to threats. You're not legally an adult until graduation. We can force you to come back home. We're calling the police to report you as a runaway. You're making a huge mistake that will ruin your entire future. They actually followed through on the police threat not once, but twice. Both times, the responding officers took one look at the situation, talked to me privately to confirm I was there willingly, and basically told my parents to get a life and stop wasting police resources. The first cop was clearly annoyed after spending 10 minutes listening to my parents' complaints. After talking to me privately and confirming that I was at my grandparents' house willingly and wasn't being coerced or manipulated, he explained the legal reality to my parents. Ma'am, your son is 19 years old and a high school senior. Unless you have concrete evidence of kidnapping or coercion, there's nothing we can do here. But he's still our minor child, my mom insisted, clinging to some fantasy legal interpretation. Ma'am, he's 19. Unless you have evidence that he was taken against his will, this isn't a police matter. This is kidnapping! They're turning him against us and interfering with our parental rights. Officer Johnson looked tired and frustrated. Did your son go to his grandparents' house willingly? Well, yes, but... Then it's not kidnapping. It's an adult making a decision about where he wants to live. The second police call came just 3 days later, bringing another officer who was significantly less patient with my parents' nonsense. We've been through this already, he told my parents with barely concealed irritation. Your son is old enough to decide where he wants to live. Maybe you should focus on the kids you still have at home instead of the one who's clearly capable of taking care of himself. My dad's face turned redder than a stop sign. This is harassment! They're interfering with our parental rights over our minor child. Your parental rights over a 19-year-old are pretty limited, sir, the officer replied dryly. I suggest you contact a lawyer if you think otherwise, but I'm telling you right now that you're wasting everyone's time with these calls. The legal threat started next. They were going to sue my grandparents for interfering with parental rights and kidnapping me, they claimed. Pops, being the absolute legend that he is, called their bluff immediately. Go ahead and get a lawyer, he told them during one particularly heated phone call. I'd love to hear you explain to a judge why you're suing to force your adult son into unpaid childcare. It's not unpaid childcare, my mom protested. It's family responsibility. Right, Pop said with perfect calm. And I'm sure a judge will be very interested in hearing about those family responsibilities that kept your son from sleeping, studying, and having any kind of normal teenage life. That comment shut them up real quick because even they knew how that would sound in a courtroom. Meanwhile, Derek was getting regular updates from Linda, who was apparently leading the family campaign to paint me as the ungrateful villain in this whole situation. The family group text, which Derek shared with me because he thought I should know what was being said, was an absolute masterpiece of delusion and denial. Linda started things off. I can't believe Tyler would abandon his family like this after everything they've done for him. His poor mother is beside herself with stress. 7 kids and no help? It's just heartbreaking. Derek, bless him, wasn't having any of it. Maybe if they'd treated him like a son instead of an employee, he wouldn't have left. Linda shot back. He's being selfish and ungrateful. Family sticks together through thick and thin, no matter what. Family doesn't exploit their children, Derek replied bluntly. You're filling his head with nonsense about being exploited, Linda continued. He had a roof over his head and food on the table. Some kids would be grateful for that. Derek's response was perfect. And what did he have to do to earn those basic necessities that every parent is legally required to provide anyway? Linda didn't have an answer for that one, which was telling. The best part was watching the family dynamic shift in real time as other relatives who'd been silent during previous gatherings started asking uncomfortable questions about the situation. My mom's cousin posted in the group chat, "Wait, why was Tyler doing so much childcare? Aren't there 6 other kids and 2 parents who should be handling that?" Suddenly, Linda was backpedaling furiously. He wasn't doing that much. He just helped out like any good big brother would. People are exaggerating the situation. Derek, being the hero he'd always been, wasn't letting that revisionist history slide. He had a baby sleeping in his room and was responsible for night feedings. That's not helping out like a big brother. That's being a parent. The truth was finally coming out, and Linda clearly didn't like how it made her precious sister look to the rest of the family. Here's where things got really interesting and showed me that my grandparents had been paying much closer attention than I'd realized. It turns out that Pops and Gran had been documenting way more than I knew about. Every concerning conversation, every time I'd shown up to their house looking exhausted, every casual joke I'd made about being the third parent. They'd been keeping track of all of it. Pops pulled out this notebook he'd been maintaining for months without telling anyone. Dates, times, detailed observations about my behavior and stress levels. The man had basically been running his own private investigation into my living situation without letting on that he was collecting evidence. The notebook was absolutely damning when you read through all the entries. Things like, March 18th, Tyler fell asleep during dinner again. Says he was up all night with the baby and his parents didn't hear her crying. April 5th, Tyler missed his school's science fair because his parents needed him to babysit. He'd been working on his project for months and was really excited about it. June 13th, noticed Tyler has lost significant weight. When asked, he said he's been too busy taking care of everyone else to eat regular meals. My grandparents had been quietly preparing for this moment for longer than any of us realized. When they called Child Protective Services, they didn't just have emotional testimony. They had months of documented evidence. Screenshots of text messages where my parents had demanded I cancel plans for babysitting duty, pictures I'd sent them of the house disaster zones that I'd thought were just funny at the time, but actually showed the level of chaos and neglect, and detailed records of how my physical and mental health had deteriorated under the stress. The social worker assigned to the case was Mrs. Chen, and when she showed up at my parents' house for the initial visit, she found exactly what you'd expect: complete and utter chaos. My parents tried their best to play it off as just one of those days, and kids being kids, but Mrs. Chen wasn't buying their act for even a second. "Where do the children usually play?" she asked, looking around the disaster zone that used to be a living room. "Oh, anywhere, really," my mom replied with forced casualness. "We believe in letting kids be creative and express themselves." "I see," Mrs. Chen said, making notes in her file. "And who typically supervises their creativity?" My parents exchanged those guilty glances that people make when they know they're about to be caught in a lie. "Well, usually our oldest son helps out, but he's not available right now." "Not available how?" Mrs. Chen pressed. "He's staying with his grandparents temporarily," my dad explained. "You know how it is. Teenage rebellion phase. Kids think they know better than their parents." Mrs. Chen made another note in her file, and I could practically see her bullshit detector going off. "I'd like to speak with the children individually, if that's okay with you." When she interviewed my siblings separately, the truth came out faster than water through a broken dam. Kids are absolutely terrible liars, especially when they're just answering honest questions about their daily routine. Who usually dealt with the baby at night? Me. Who helped with homework when they were struggling? Me. Who got them ready for school when mom and dad were too tired to get up? Take a wild guess. Who made sure they brushed their teeth, had clean clothes, and ate something resembling breakfast? 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. Banshee, bless his chaotic little heart, was particularly honest during his interview. "Tyler does everything," he told Mrs. Chen, with the blunt honesty that only children possess. "Mom and dad watch TV mostly. My big brother helped me with everything. He's the one who taught me to tie my shoes and read bedtime stories." The house inspection that followed was even more damning than the interviews. Mrs. Chen asked pointed questions about living arrangements, supervision, and the distribution of household responsibilities. How long has your oldest child been primarily responsible for childcare duties? She asked during the formal interview portion of her visit. He's not primarily responsible, my mom protested. He just helps out when we need it, like any good big brother would. According to the other children, he was the one handling night feedings, bedtime routines, and daily care for the infant. Would you consider that helping out? My parents fumbled around for explanations, but they couldn't come up with any good justifications for why their teenage son had been functioning as a third parent. The final nail in the coffin was when Mrs. Chen asked to see where Hurricane had been sleeping. My parents had to admit that the crib had been set up in my room rather than theirs. So where is the baby sleeping now that your son has moved out? Oh, we moved the crib to the living room temporarily while we figure out a more permanent solution, my mom said, like this was a perfectly normal arrangement. Temporarily, Mrs. Chen repeated, clearly not believing a word of it. Mrs. Chen wrapped up her initial visit with a promise to return for follow-up inspections and individual interviews with each family member. The look on my parents' faces suggested they knew they were completely screwed and that their house of cards was finally collapsing. The CPS investigation wrapped up after 4 intensive weeks of unannounced visits, detailed interviews, and thorough documentation review. The official finding was everything I'd hoped for and exactly what anyone with functioning brain cells already knew. Inappropriate delegation of parental responsibilities to a minor child, resulting in documented educational impact and emotional stress. In non-bureaucratic language, my parents were officially guilty of exactly what everyone had been saying all along. They'd been using their teenager as free labor instead of actually parenting their children. The consequences were absolutely beautiful to watch unfold. First, mandatory parenting classes, not suggested or recommended, but required. My parents, both in their 30s, had to sit in a classroom with other dysfunctional adults and learn what responsibilities you can actually give to children of different ages. Imagine being over 30 years old and having to take a class on basic parenting because you're too incompetent to figure it out yourself. Required childcare education came next. They had to complete an entire course on age-appropriate household tasks and recognizing signs of stress in children. 7 months of supervised visits from a family caseworker followed. Mrs. Chen would be making surprise visits to ensure they weren't pulling the same exploitative crap with my remaining siblings. The house had to maintain certain cleanliness and safety standards. The kids had to be properly supervised during all activities. And most importantly, my parents had to demonstrate actual parenting skills instead of just chaos management and crisis response. But my personal favorite consequence was the professional childcare requirement. They were now legally required to use actual paid babysitters for date nights and errands. No more free labor from their children. No more dumping responsibilities on siblings who were too young to handle them. Finally, there was a written acknowledgement of my rights. They had to sign an official document stating that I had the right to pursue education and age-appropriate activities without being burdened by excessive household responsibilities that should be handled by adults. The real consequences hit them exactly where it hurt the most: their wallets and their reputation. Word about the CPS investigation spread through their social circle faster than wildfire, and suddenly other parents were asking uncomfortable questions about their family dynamics. Some of their friends started viewing them very differently when they learned the real reason why their oldest son had moved out. The financial impact was immediate and absolutely brutal. Professional childcare for 5 kids during their weekly date night? That's easily $120 to $180 per night, every single time they want to go out. Now they had to pay someone actual money or drag all the kids along with them, which meant dealing with the chaos themselves for once. My dad had to pick up extra shifts at work just to cover the babysitting costs, and my mom couldn't maintain her comfortable part-time schedule anymore because someone actually had to be home with the kids during non-school hours. During one particularly tense family gathering after the CPS findings came out, Linda tried her best to defend them and maintain the family narrative. CPS just doesn't understand how close families operate, she insisted. They're interfering with family dynamics that work perfectly fine. Derek, who was completely fed up with her enabling behavior, finally let her have it with both barrels. Close families don't treat their teenagers like unpaid employees. Maybe if you'd spoken up instead of encouraging this mess for years, things wouldn't have gotten this far. I was supporting my sister, Linda defended herself. You were enabling child exploitation, Derek shot back without hesitation. The room went absolutely dead silent. Even my parents couldn't argue with that brutal but accurate assessment. My mom's pregnancy, which had started as a source of excitement, became a significant source of stress instead of joy. The custody threats that my parents had been making evaporated completely when their lawyer, they eventually did get one, explained that any judge would laugh them out of court for trying to force a 19-year-old into unpaid childcare. The lawyer actually recommended that they focus on repairing their relationship with me instead of trying to compel my return through legal action. As for me, I'm absolutely thriving in ways I never thought possible. My grades bounced back immediately once I started getting full nights of sleep for the first time in years. I went from that dismal 2.9 GPA to pulling a solid 3.7 by the end of senior year. I got accepted to that engineering program I'd missed the previous summer. They had a spot open for a spring session, and this time nobody could stop me from taking it. My college applications are looking incredibly solid now that I can actually focus on my future instead of managing everyone else's present. I've even got a part-time job at Pops' buddy's auto shop, doing real work that pays actual money. What a revolutionary concept. Working for compensation instead of working for free because someone guilt-tripped you into it. Pops and Gran have refused every attempt from my parents to send money for my expenses. We're investing in our grandson's future, Gran told my mom during one heated phone call. Something you should have been doing all along instead of using him as free labor. The relationship with my parents is permanently damaged, but honestly, I'm completely at peace with that outcome. Some bridges are meant to be burned when the other side has been exploiting you for years. Some of my siblings have started asking pointed questions about why I left and why strangers keep visiting the house to check on things. Banshee, with his typical lack of filter, asked my mom directly, "Why did Tyler have to take care of Hurricane at night when that's supposed to be parent stuff?" My mom's response was predictably vague. "It's okay, sweetie. Families help each other out." But Banshee, not satisfied with non-answers, shot back with devastating childhood logic. "But why didn't you help him with his homework like he helped us with ours?" Out of the mouths of babes, right? Even an 11-year-old could see the fundamental unfairness of the situation. Derek has become an even bigger part of my life, truly taking on that big brother role I never knew I needed. He's been my advocate, my support system, and my reality check when I start doubting whether my decision was the right one. The best part of this whole situation is watching my parents finally learn what it actually takes to raise 6 kids without exploiting their oldest child. Derek's response to their financial complaints was absolutely perfect. Welcome to what actual parenting costs. Most people figure that out before having 6 kids. My parents are finally experiencing the reality of what they signed up for when they decided to have a large family. They're discovering that children require time, energy, money, and actual parental involvement, not just someone else to dump the responsibilities on. They're learning that babies wake up at night and need care, that kids need homework help, and that maintaining a household with 6 children is actually a full-time job that requires real effort from the actual parents. The irony is beautiful. For years, they lived in this fantasy where they could have as many kids as they wanted because they had me to handle all the difficult parts. Now they're faced with the reality that parenting is hard work, and they can't just delegate it to their children anymore.